Good afternoon, and thank you for all to participate in this webinar. This part of the presentation will address which are the guidance and the documents that contain that have been developed as the new NIP guidance package. This presentation, as you see, you can find that the NIPS package is composed by different elements. The first part relates to the general guidance, and you can see that in the block at your left. The general guidance contains 3 main documents, and then the core documents that were developed and are completely new guidances are the ones for the inventories and also for other action plans. I will explain in detail later. The NIP package is also composed of some supporting documents. These supporting documents are to be used across the whole set of guidance. So they are put in a separate part so that anytime you want to find out something that relates to all of them, you might find them there. And the last part relates to additional guidance. I will be presenting both of these items as well afterwards. If I may, I will go back to the general guidance, the part in the presentation that relates to the block in the left. And in there, you will find 3 main documents. The first one used to be called Guidance for Developing a National Implementation Plan. Now it is this document is called Guidance for Developing, Updating, and Reviewing National Implementation Plans. And it was reviewed, updated in the light of the new chemicals that were added to the Stockholm Convention in 2009 and 2011. So besides the regular processes and phases of the NIP update, you will find also some annexes related to the new chemicals listed in a very general manner. The second one that you can see there relates to action plan costing. This is a guidance that was prepared years ago, some years ago, and was updated. In particular, you'll see there the tree. This guidance contains at the end decision trees. So if you have any doubts on how the convention works in relation to any chemical, you can go there and find out, for example, for Lindane, how the different commitments are, what are you supposed to be doing, does it have exemptions, does it not? And as they are decision trees, you will follow your path, your own national path, answering yes or no to the different questions, and that will be showing you what you need to do. The last presentation there, Guidance for Socioeconomic Assessment, was a guidance that was also under the consideration of the COP. It's a draft guidance, and it has not been changed at all. The Conference of the Parties requested to make changes following or taking into consideration the comments by parties. We did not receive any specific comments, so that guidance is still as it used to be in 2007. The other part of the package related to inventories, and as you may see, there are 2 main inventory guidance that are new, the PFOS and related chemicals inventory approach, and the second one, the PVDs inventory guidance. Both of them have a common methodology, and both of them, the approach is very similar, related to the main sectors using PFOS and PVDs. In particular, both of them deals with POPs in articles and how to really know the country's situation in that regard. The guidances that are called Action Plan Development Guidance are related to the best available technique and best environmental practices. In the case of PFOS, it's for the use of PFOS, and in the case of the PVDs, it's a guidance to address recycling and waste disposal of articles. This guidance in particular, and these both guidances are initial guidance under Stockholm, but Basel Convention is working in a small intersessional working group, and they will be developing more specific guidance to address waste issues and considerations in relation to both chemicals, to both entries, to PFOS and to PVDEs. There are some other documents that are looking at action plan development. That's the labeling of product and articles, which is the objective of this webinar today. This labeling also will be, Rainer will be telling you more details afterwards. Rainer is the presenter today. Welcome to our session. The other guidance relates to the control of import and export of POPs. At the beginning, this was a guidance only for customs, but now as it has been developed, it can be used also by other stakeholders at the national level that relates to the control of these chemicals. The other one that you see in there is the guidance that relates to how to strengthen regulatory frameworks to enabling the monitoring of POPs in articles and products. This is a guidance that goes through the life cycle of the chemicals and tries to indicate in each of those steps which are the main things to consider to strengthen national frameworks. Sorry. Supporting documents. What are supporting documents? Here you'll see a list of the titles of these ones. The first one relates to terminology and how the different terms are used across the guidance so that it does not make any confusions according to the different legislation or to the different understanding. The other ones in there, I will not go through them, but you can read very well. But I will highlight the ones that relate to information on POPs listed in 2009-2011, the identity of PFOS and PFOS-related chemicals, and chemicals contained with POPs. Those are the ones that you can read counting 3 from the bottom. And that wants to be initial seed for a database. Those are information in Excel sheets at this moment. And you will find that also in this NIP guidance package. As you might remember, I was mentioning at the beginning that there are already existing resources for developing the National Implementation Plan. There are some that are general, and here I am quoting 2. One is the step-by-step guide that was adopted in 2011 by and this is a very general document. It's very easy to go and move forward. And the other one is lessons learned and good practices. That was a paper developed by the GEF implementing agencies, UNEP in particular, addressing what were the situations and main issues to consider when developing national implementation plans after the experience of the countries that started with the process when the convention, before the convention entry into force. There are also as resources available thematic guidelines. For example, here I'm quoting the PCB ones. So when you go into the web and see all the package together, you will also have references to the different documents that relate to PCBs, but not only for PCBs, also for the BAT and BEP, for Annex C chemicals, the toolkit of quantification of dioxins and furanes. These are just examples of the things that you might find in the web when you go into the NIP part to download. Webinars and updating NIPs. My colleague Francesca might be telling you something more afterwards, but we are going to keep on delivering webinars on this package. You might find the different titles we are going to address. This webinar in particular is in English, but there will be also some in English and French. So those of you that speak other languages will also benefit from this type of activity. Where are you going to be able to find these guidelines? If you go into the Stockholm Convention website, www.pops.int, then you have to go and open the implementation window below the picture. And when you open that, you'll see a menu. And in one of the menus, it says NIPs. And if you go through it, you'll find the word guidance. So clicking on guidance, you'll find this this package. It's going to be uploaded. It's being uploaded, so today you might be ready to get the guidelines. From the Secretariat side, at this moment, this is the presentation. So I pass Francesca the thing.
Jacqueline. As you noticed, I skipped the introduction of the participants because we were a bit tight with time. So before I introduce the second presenter, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself before you pose a question during the questions and answers. I would like to now give the floor to Rainer Arndt, who is the chair of the POPs Review Committee, for his presentation on labeling of products or articles that contain new POPs, initial considerations. Rainer, you have the floor. Unfortunately, you are currently muted. Please unmute yourself before.
Sorry. Yes, welcome to you all. My name is Rainer Arndt, and I will introduce you into the paper, into the initial considerations on labeling of products or articles that contain new POPs. And the background of this initial considerations was that it became apparent that it is important when POPs are listed that there is some information along the supply chain from the producer to the user, to the exporter, to the importer, to the final user, and then to the people responsible for waste management on information whether a POPs is contained in a mixture or other products or articles. Next slide, please. Okay, so the objective of the document, these considerations, is to assist parties in deciding to develop labeling schemes for products and articles or to adapt existing labeling schemes, to understand the essential elements of these schemes and to be able to adapt international schemes to national needs. Next slide. The main target audience are national policymakers who want to prevent illegal import or export of banned POPs and severely restricted chemicals, but also who want to facilitate identification of POPs in articles at the end of the life cycle. And these national policymakers are the number one target audience to develop such a labeling scheme, and then the other the national organizations and standard setting can support this. Authorities involved in the collection of information on new POPs within the country could use a labeling scheme. Conference of parties should take note of these labeling schemes, and there are international bodies who work on labeling schemes who could further develop this, like the GHS Globally Harmonized System Subcommittee, the International Standard Organization, and international industry associations. Next slide. So the first, what has been done was to analyze existing labeling schemes. And there are schemes where there is information exchange along the supply chain that certain chemicals are not in mixtures or articles. So these are systems that could help to avoid the use of POPs in mixtures and articles and communicate along the supply chain that these chemicals are not in there. For example, there is an European Union restriction on the use of hazardous substances in electrical and electronic equipment. And in this regulation, there are 6 substances, including polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are now listed as POPs, as tetra and penta bromodiphenyl ether and hexa and heptabromodiphenyl ether. So these are not allowed in more than 0.1% in homogeneous articles that are part of the electronic equipment. And when articles are in conformity with this obligation, they are labeled with a mark that said CE, which means it's in conformity with the obligation of this directive. That implies that anyone who produces electric equipment or imports electronic or electrical equipment into the EU or produces within the EU has to make sure that in these articles there is not more than 0.1% of PBDEs. Next slide. Then this European system, which is as I said, just for the European Union, had impact on the industries outside the European Union, for example, in the United States or China or other countries where this electronic devices are produced. And this industry had to make sure that along the supply chain, from producing certain parts of the electronic equipment to building the final product, that there is an information exchange on the content of these 6 chemicals that are forbidden to be in the equipment in more than 0.1% when you export it to the European Union. And so there is a joint industry guide, voluntary guide by industry, which is applied by the members of the Consumer Electronic Associations with about 2,000 companies. And the suppliers report the presence of problematic substances above a threshold limit like 0.1% through a standardized material declaration for the whole supply chain. This tool enables producers outside the EU to fulfill the EU rules obligations because the importer will rely on this material declaration and will apply for this CE mark that allows the import of the electronic equipment into the EU. Okay, so the 2 systems are, there's a legislation in a region in the world, and then there's an impact on producers outside and also inside the EU to communicate the information on the content of certain chemicals. And one of the chemicals is a group called poly-BDEs, which contain the 2 listed BDEs under the Stockholm Convention. Other systems to avoid the use of POPs are eco-labels, where it is labeled that certain chemicals are not in articles or products, and the POPs-free initiative of the Stockholm Convention, which is a voluntary initiative to motivate industry to substitute POPs and to produce POPs-free products, and they can then use the POPs-freeness of their products as an argument when they sell their products as an advertisement. Next slide. And then there exists now worldwide a harmonized system, the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling of hazardous chemicals. And this system covers all POPs, as all POPs are hazardous, as described in the GH criteria for the GHS. That means that each POPs is a hazardous chemical and has to be classified and labeled according to the GHS, at least in those countries who have implemented the GHS, the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling. And I think now there are about 70 countries who have implemented or are in the process of doing so. The GHS is an information system along the supply chain for chemicals and mixtures to protect worker, farmer, consumer, and so on, and the environment. And it is implemented voluntarily by many countries, I said about 60 to 70 countries. When a chemical has to be labeled, then on the package of the chemical has to appear a chemical name and the CAS number of the chemical on the chemical name and the CAS number of the chemical, And when it is a mixture of chemicals, the chemical name and CAS number of the hazardous chemicals in a mixture, when this chemical is in a mixture in concentrations about a cutoff level. That means, in summary, that each POP that is a hazardous chemical, and all POPs are hazardous, that if they are traded as such as chemicals, they have to be classified and labeled. The chemical name of the POPs and the CAS number has to be on the package. So everybody can check and control when it's properly classified and labeled, and can control the on the market of the country. When you do inventories, you will identify these POPs. In mixtures, these chemicals, these POPs in mixtures, have to be given on the label as with their names when they are in a certain concentration, which is higher than a cutoff level. And I come to the next slide, please. No, I can. Oops. Well, then I come later to the cutoff levels. Then for articles and chemicals, as I said, the globally harmonized system is about labeling and information along the supply chain of chemicals and mixtures. Articles, which are computers and printers and cars and so on, they don't fall under the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling. So that is why for the labeling of flame retardants, the international standard organizations for the labeling of flame retardant in plastic materials that are used in articles, the ISO developed the ISO 1043, which is a voluntary industrial guideline. The purpose was that you would label plastic materials in a certain way, which I explain in a minute, and this labeling would allow recyclers to identify what type of chemicals and flame retardants especially are now included in the plastic material, and what plastic material would be without any specific hazardous chemical. And there is a code marking that is imprinted on the small plastic particles, and it should be there. If it's more than 1% of a flame retardant, then you would get a marking FR with a number, and the number 18 would be for polybrominated diphenyl ether. And you see an example where the flame retardant is red phosphorus. It would be FR52. And for polybrominated diphenyl ether, that means either it is tetra and penta bromodiphenyl ether, or hexa and hepta, which are both listed under the Stockholm Convention since 2009. It would be the imprint FR18, so one could identify these chemicals already in plastics materials used in articles. Next slide. Then there has been from 1982 to 1999, there has been a labeling requirements for certain articles containing crocodylid asbestos in the European community. I just have to say that from 1999, any crocodylid asbestos is banned. So it's an historical example, but it was the only example I could find where there was a legal obligation how that articles that were marketed must be labeled if it contained crocodyllids. These were asbestos cement pipes and acid and temperature resistant seals, gaskets, and gland packaging. The shape, size, format, and content of the label was mandatory. Next slide. And at the end of the analysis, there are some labeling systems or information systems which you use when you make a national inventory of chemicals or POPs. For example, in the Stockholm Convention for the labeling of POPs, you are obliged when you have done your inventory and you want to keep track of the appliances, transformers, for example, that contain PCB, you should label it actually on the transformer, and that indicates that this contains PCB. So this is a tool that you don't lose information when you have identified something. You just label the equipment for later to identify it later again. For other articles, it's not so easy to fix something like carpets or so, to fix something to the carpet, and so there are ideas how to track articles containing new POPs in these two guidances that are outlined here, the guidance for inventory for PBDEs and the guidance for inventories for PFOS. Okay, this was the analysis stage. Next slide. Now the use of the document. And to use the document, and the use would be sort of to discuss nationally and to decide on labeling systems, to develop and to use labeling systems. And the purpose of this labeling systems, as I said before, would be to identify these chemicals when they are imported into your country, when they're exported out of your country, and for the user. And just to remind you sort of what is covered and regulated by the convention, it is first the listed POPs as itself. Okay. Then there are mixtures where you have a chemical where you add a listed POP. Then there could be an article which is produced and you intentionally add a listed POP. But also a non-POPs chemical that, due to its industrial production, contains the listed POPs unintentionally as a contaminant in a concentration higher than a trace contaminant. And this could be dicofol with DDT would be an example. So this is important to understand, that if a listed POPs is in something higher than a trace contaminant, like DDT is dicofol is contaminated with DDT. Now the question would be how much and what is a trace contaminant. Okay, and the examples are a listed POPs is DDT, a POPs mixture is biowet, it's PFOS related chemicals, and the POPs article is also a PFOS related chemical for carpet surface treatment. Next slide. When you consider to have a labeling system, you should consider what is the aim, the objective, what you will label, how it will be labeled, and how it's done technically, how if you can enforce the system, and what resources are needed for implementation. Next slide. Now, this is again to make clear what labeling can deliver in the supply chain. The first principle is, if you avoid the use of POPs in mixtures and articles, this would be more efficient than labeling the presence of POPs, because you would have no POPs at all in the mixture or article. And tools like the European Union RoHS Directive would be, or the non-POPs-free activity of the Stockholm Convention are those activities. Then it is up to the producer and the exporting countries that should either avoid POPs, or they should implement a labeling system that gives information to the user, because only the producer knows what he puts into mixtures and articles, and only if he informs others through a labeling system, then the user can be warned and can make use of the information that the POPs is in the mixture or in the article. And importing parties should implement the same labeling system as the exporting country, raise awareness, by the user and enforce the labeling system. And because a labeling system will allow the identification of POPs and mixtures and articles along the whole supply chain. So what this means is also that it doesn't really make sense for a country on its own to have a labeling system. It is sometimes effective if you are a very large economic region, when you have labeling requirements for import, like the EU with a CE label for electronic equipment. But for smaller countries, I think it is not such a good choice. It would be better if there would be something internationally harmonized. There would be an internationally harmonized system that is then applicable to all. Next slide. And so, but when you actually consider a labeling system, it's important whether you are a producer or an importer. You should look what labeling systems you have in place. Can they be adapted to include new POPs? Important is, as I said, the globally harmonized system, because it applies to all chemicals but also all POPs. And do you have the resources to develop and implement a labeling system? That's the analysis of the national situation. Next slide. So when you could design and implement a labeling system, you could adapt an existing system to the country needs and resources. There you consider your economic situation, the health issues by POPs, and the status of public awareness, the high-level support. Then you could implement the system stepwise with medium and long-term implementation goals. You could do it first provisional and then adapt the system. And you could use this example in the document, which will be hopefully in the website, as a starter for your labeling system. Next slide. So when you consider elements for classification and labeling, then you should have priorities to the approaches that are already implemented nationally, and then you have to see, are these approaches voluntary or legally binding? Do you want to move voluntary to legally binding? And are industrial chemicals, pesticides labeled following the same approach like the GHS? Next slide. Then you have to analyze which industries and manufacturers have adopted already voluntary labeling. Has the RoHS directive been adopted in your country already? What methods have been adapted for classification labeling of specific or all uses of plastics, like the ISO system on flame retardants? Have they been adopted for named POPs and articles that may be recycled? And information, there are supporting documents. You can find more on POPs-free and unintentional trace contaminants in these documents. Next slide. If you consider to have a labeling system, then you have to look at the potential for international harmonization of this system. And so you should consider to implement the GHS. And when you do this, to cover all POPs. When I say all POPs, then this is said because there is some specific labeling for pesticides from FAO, WHO, which doesn't take into account all POPs properties, but that is something which you should consider for POPs to make all hazardous properties mandatory to be classified and labeled. That everything is on the label for POPs. When there is a labeling system, then one should harmonize this at the international level using, for example, the COP of the Stockholm Convention. one could consider through the COP, that's the subcommittee for the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling, could look whether they identify international agreed labels for POPs and also cut-off levels in mixtures. And then you should consider nationally and internationally the challenges of identification of POPs in articles, which is a very complex question. Next slide. So in summary, the labeling of POPs as a chemical in mixtures and in articles is very helpful to identify them for customs control, for inspectorates, for when you want to do an inventory, when you want to to avoid illegal trade, when you want to see when there are exemptions for listed POPs that there is legal trade. And the first thing to look at when you want to do classification labeling is a globally harmonized system for classification and labeling. And in this globally harmonized system for classification and labeling, all POPs have to be labeled as hazardous chemicals, and so the name and the CAS number has to be on the label, which is attached to the package. It allows the identification. In mixtures, everything above a cutoff level, and the cutoff level in the GHS depends on the hazards of the chemical. And for POPs, it's normally 0.1% in a mixture is a cutoff level. That means if a POP is in 0.1 or higher concentration, 0.1% in the mixture, then the name of the POPs and the CAS number has to be on the label. If it's below, then it doesn't have to be on the label. And second, if an impurity like dichlorol in DDT, DDT in dichlorol would be equal or more than 0.1%, then the dichlorol would be regulated like a POPs. Second is that the question of labeling and articles is a very complicated one. There is some labeling in the EU which is not globally harmonized, that just indicates that certain chemicals are not part of the electronic equipment, and there is this a labeling of plastics for flame retardants. So the best would be to work together with other countries, especially when you are a small country, to work together with other countries through the COP to discuss whether anything that is special and needed for POPs could be developed and implemented then internationally. Thank you very much for your attention.